Hello, thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Reports in Israeli media that Israel and Lebanon could be on the verge of a ceasefire agreement. Iran says it's willing to return to negotiations on its nuclear program and has postponed plans to attack Israel. And despite being at war on multiple fronts, Israel takes part in climate talks in Azerbaijan. First, Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets at Israel's northern city of Haifa earlier today. Most were intercepted, but some fell in open areas. This as Israeli media reports that a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon could be less than 24 hours away. The Minister for Energy, Eli Cohen, said that Israel was now closer to a deal than at any time during the war, but that Israel must retain freedom of action should Hezbollah return to the border areas. Well, let's go to northern Israel now, and our correspondent Balya Sladin is standing by. Balya, what's the latest?
Yes, for the past 10 or even 15 minutes, we're hearing sirens in the area of the Western Galilee and even reached Haifa. So the sirens started in Achziv, and then because of the drone that was fired from Lebanon that is still going until this hour south to the Israeli cities. Now we are getting that there is sirens also in Dariat el-Carmel, which means that the drone is still continuing south deep inside the Israeli territory. We're talking about tens of kilometers from the Israeli-Lebanese border. The IDF is saying that they are tracking the drone and they are trying to intercept it. Something similar, of course, happened before. We're seeing this happening almost every single day. A drone that is fired from Lebanon is being tracked, and then very a long time after that only either intercepted or falls. Of course, in rare cases happened that this drone caused damage and also casualties, something similar to what happened about a month ago in Binyamina when 4 soldiers were killed. So we're tracking what is happening, and currently we are seeing that the drone is still in the air, and some of the fighter jets are trying to intercept it. Now going back to what happened during this day, a barrage of rockets, about 5 rockets fired toward Haifa. Hezbollah is saying that they have targeted an Israeli airbase in military base in Haifa, but most of the rockets were intercepted. Others fell in open areas. Something similar happened also here in the Upper Galilee, in the area of Kiryat Shmone. But in general, I would say that it is relatively a calm day. We are not seeing any large barrage of rockets to what happened a couple of days ago, or even last week, of 70 rockets or 50 rockets. And about that also the IDF has given some more information today in regards to the expansion of the ground operation in southern Lebanon, saying that 60% or more of the rockets that are fired from Lebanon are now fired from a 1-barrel or a 3-barrel launcher, which means that Hezbollah is not really being able to fire a large barrage of rockets just like they were doing in the past month or so. So 3 divisions are now operating in the south of Lebanon, in the eastern and also in the western front, in areas that haven't been operated in before. We're talking about 5 to 6 kilometers deep inside the south of Lebanon, which means that we're seeing this ground operation is still expanding while we're waiting to see what is going to be happening with the diplomatic efforts to reach a ceasefire agreement.
Balya, thank you very much indeed for that update. Balya Sladin there in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Yaakov Lapin is the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon, and he's a military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate. Good to have you with us, Yaakov. Hi. So, given what we've heard from Minister Eli Cohen and these reports saying that Lebanon could respond to a ceasefire offer within 24 hours, do you think Israel has done enough to degrade Hezbollah at this point to consider a ceasefire?
I think that Israel has fundamentally improved the security situation in northern Israel. It has essentially destroyed Hezbollah's ability to invade northern Israel, to conquer the Galilee plan, which was a plan that would have been even worse than October 7th had it gone ahead. with thousands of highly trained Hezbollah Radwan unit members invading the north. That plan, the infrastructure for that plan has been destroyed. The villages, the Shiite villages on the border that would have acted as the launch pad for that attack have been neutralized as terror infrastructure bases. And most of Hezbollah's firepower has actually been destroyed. So instead of firing, many thousands of projectiles a day, they're down to between 50 to 150, which of course is far too much. And now, I think that the IDF is tackling some of that anti-tank fire as well. At the end of the day, most of Hezbollah's force has been severely degraded. So I think Israel is in a position to consider a ceasefire. But the big question remains enforcement. What will happen once Hezbollah tries to rebuild its offensive capabilities in southern Lebanon? How will Israel respond? And will it have international legitimacy to essentially disrupt those efforts? Those are the big questions. Those are the unknowns. My assumption is that Israel will only agree to a ceasefire if at least the United States and the document that the United States is preparing as part of this arrangement will recognize its right to stop Hezbollah from building a new war machine in southern Lebanon. That's the very minimal conditions.
Right, and that's what Eli Cohen is talking about. Israel must retain freedom of action if Hezbollah is seen to be rearming and reassembling close to the border. But We've been here before, haven't we, Yaakov, back in 2006? What is to suggest it would be different this time around?
Well, we have been here before, except the big difference is that between 2006 and until the start of this war, Israel essentially was willing to outsource the enforcement of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 to two players who had absolutely no ability to enforce it. One was UNIFIL, and I think we've talked a lot in the studio about how useless UNIFIL has been in enforcing any kind of Hezbollah-free zone. Hezbollah built up a monstrous military terrorist capability right under UNIFIL's nose, quite literally in some cases next to their posts, and just used them as human shields. So UNIFIL obviously can't do that job. And the Lebanese armed forces are equally useless. They have been infiltrated by Hezbollah. They have been used by Hezbollah. So the big difference here is that Israel's saying, look, it's going to be us. There's nobody else that can enforce it. It's going to be the IDF that enforces it. And the international community has got to legitimize that position. That's what Israel is saying. That's going to be the big difference. And we'll have to see whether that actually happens. But at least in theory, that's what Israel is demanding right now, that recognition.
All right, Yaakov, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk about Hezbollah's patrons in Tehran, because Iran says it wants to return to negotiations over its nuclear program. This is the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog prepares to take action against the regime. Tehran has also reportedly decided to postpone its much-anticipated attack on Israel. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, has more.
Iran appears to be shifting its strategy, at least in the short term, ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House. Sky News in Arabic reported that Iran has decided to postpone its vowed attack against Israel following the results of the U.S. presidential elections. That, of course, doesn't mean Tehran won't continue with its threats.
We will fight you to the end and will not allow you to control and dictate the fate of Muslims. We will take revenge and you will receive painful blows. Wait for our response.
Iran was also stonewalled by Iraq after Baghdad refused to allow use of its territory and airspace to launch attacks against Israel. All the while, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq have increased the rate of daily drone launches at Israeli territory. Iran's foreign minister struck a different tone, signaling openness to engage with the incoming Trump administration.
We have differences with the Americans, which are sometimes very fundamental and central and may not be resolved, but we must manage them to reduce their costs and decrease the tensions. Communication channels with the Americans remain open.
Araghchi added that Iran is ready to negotiate with the United States over its nuclear program, as the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, visits Tehran in a push to restore access of inspectors to Iran's nuclear sites.
We know each other well, and we know that it is indispensable to get, at this point in time, to some concrete, tangible, visible results that will indicate that this joint work is improving the situation, is bringing clarification to things, and in a general sense is moving us away from conflict and ultimately war.
But significant gaps remain as some European powers are pushing to take action against Iran at the next IAEA Board of Governors meeting next week.
Any interventionist resolution in the nuclear affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran will definitely be met with immediate countermeasures.
Grossi says he will visit important nuclear facilities in Fordow and Natanz on Friday. Whether that will lead to the return of IAEA inspectors remains to be seen.
Well, let's get more on that now with Jason Brodsky. He's the policy director at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Thanks for being with us, Jason. And we're certainly seeing a change in tone coming out of Tehran these days, aren't we? What do you read into those comments by the foreign minister?
Yes, it's great to be with you, Laura. There is a change in tone. I think that the Iranian regime is really becoming very risk-averse in the aftermath of Donald Trump's re-election as president. And before he was re-elected, Tehran, at least in rhetoric, was much more risk-ready. And so I think that that's quite telling, and it's akin to a Trump effect, if you will, because the supreme leader knows Donald Trump is unpredictable, and it rattles the system. And that is beneficial for U.S. interests because it could restrain Tehran from taking more aggressive action.
In the past, Donald Trump has said that he would like to renegotiate an agreement with Iran. He has made it clear that he wants to end conflict in the region. Do you think that he might seek to negotiate another deal?
Well, I think the president-elect has stated that, but I do think that the United States is going to be in the short term looking to rebuild its deterrence in the Middle East, as well as increase sanctions on Tehran and diplomatic isolation as well. That appears in the short term to be the direction of travel in the new administration, and I welcome that. I think the Islamic Republic needs to be made to feel that a choice. It could face the collapse of its regime or the dismantlement of its nuclear program. And the choice has to be made through tools of statecraft that the United States has: economic, diplomatic, and military. And right now, we're nowhere near having employed the requisite tools and leverage against the Islamic Republic of Iran to force it into that choice.
The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, will visit the nuclear sites at Natanz and Fordow in the next couple of days. Do you think that we might get a clearer picture of just how advanced Iran's nuclear program is, or will they be seeking to obfuscate and cover things up?
Well, I think the IAEA will be releasing its quarterly reports on Iran's nuclear program, as it routinely does, and we'll have more insights from the information that they've collected. But nevertheless, I don't anticipate that there will be any big steps by Tehran to resolve the long-standing questions of violations of the safeguards agreements and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that Iran has been in violation of for years. And I think that the Director General is heading to Tehran, trying to fulfill his mandate, and that's important. But I would not expect any large steps from Tehran. We've been still trying to implement the March 2023 joint statement between the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it hasn't been implemented. And so I think that this is prompting the Europeans to take more aggressive action before the Board of Governors, including tabling a censure resolution with the mention of the need for a comprehensive report by the agency as to Iran's nuclear program to set the stage for a potential snapback of sanctions at the UN Security Council.
And just a word, Jason, if you would, on whether Iran still plans to attack Israel in response to that Israeli attack on its missile and air defense facilities several weeks ago. Do you think that they've decided it's just not worth it?
I think the Iranian system is weighing its options. Let's not forget it does have a variety of tools to use against Israel. It could retaliate via a terror wave throughout Europe and South America, Africa, against Israeli interests and Jewish sites as well. Iran has that ability, and it could ensure plausible deniability for the system to prevent escalation with Israel at a time when it's so exposed with its air defense system degraded and its proxies very degraded as well.
All right, Jason, thank you very much indeed. Jason Brodsky at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
And Yakov Lapin still with me in the studio. Do you agree with Jason's assessment that the Iranians might seek a soft target, Jewish or Israeli targets outside of Israel?
I think that that's becoming increasingly likely. They're always trying to hit soft targets, including Israeli civilians and embassies and even Jewish targets. And Hezbollah also has international terror networks as well. They coordinate these attacks. But now that option may seem more attractive to them than ever before because they have no functional air defenses right now over almost all of Iran. So any state-on-state attack by Iran will open them up to devastating Israeli attacks and possibly on their nuclear sites, possibly on oil and energy sites. And I don't think they want to take that risk, especially now with the Trump administration coming in. I think they're making those calculations. It's very hard to get into their heads, so we have to be, cautious. But at the end of the day, it looks to me like they are looking for a way to climb down from those threats, because really state-on-state conflict is not the Iranian strategy. They always prefer to work via proxy. So I think we have to look out for international attacks. Absolutely, I agree with Jason. And also their nuclear program has to be very, very closely watched, because they could try and create facts on the ground, enrich their uranium to military grade, make some sort of progress on the nuclear detonator or the warhead.
Right, they've got 2 months till Donald Trump takes office, so they do have a period of time where they could make progress there.
Exactly. So I think we have to be very, very vigilant, and I'm sure that the intelligence community of Israel is extremely attentive to Iran's nuclear activities going forward.
Yaakov, now, thank you. Well, the IDF says it did carry out airstrikes in Syria earlier today, striking what it called a significant blow to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist group. Several buildings and command centres belonging to the group were hit. The Islamic Jihad works alongside both Hamas and Hezbollah in its attacks on Israel. Well, for more on that, we can go to Syria. We're joined by journalist Badarkhan Ahmed. I'm sorry, Badarkhan, I know you're in Europe now, but you are originally, of course, from Syria. Tell us a bit about then what happened in Damascus today. That must have been quite a significant blast.
Well, in Damascus, there was an Israeli attack. Normally, like the same that happened before, it's more focused in Al-Mazza town or Al-Mazza neighborhood inside Damascus, the capital. And this attack, according to the sources, that has resulted to the death of 4 members from Al-Jihad al-Islami. So recently, there are a lot of Israeli attacks, specifically on Damascus, and I think it's logical because it's more connected to the war, to the Israeli war against Lebanon, and we can see that all the war is turned to like a war between Israel and Iran. So there are a lot of worries from the people that this fire can move to maybe Syria, more significant, and maybe to Iraq, because the Iranian activity is connected between Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. So, and according to the strikes that specifically the targeting to close to the Lebanese and Syrian borders, this is affecting the movements of civilians who's trying to flee from Lebanon to Syria. And in the militarily way, it's more logical because there is a big activity with Hezbollah forces and members between Syria and Lebanon.
And Badarkhan, I mean, Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad, has made it clear that he wants to very much stay out of this war. So how can he square that with the fact that there are Palestinian Islamic Jihad cells inside Damascus?
I think the situation in Syria is not like how the people can imagine. Syria became so divided between many different sides and forces. Generally, it's under the control of the Syrian government, but I think they don't control really what is going on the ground. Specifically, the Iranian movements or the factions movements, because we know already that Iran was the biggest army or the power of Iran who supported the Syrian government to fight on the ground, while Russia was fighting in the flight. So I think they don't have any decisions for control the situation. But the Syrian government, as politic or as a military, they want to be avoided from what is going on.
Badarkhan, stay with me because I do want to come back to you, but I want to bring in Yaakov Lapin here. And striking Syria is key, isn't it, to preventing Hezbollah from rearming?
100%. Syria is one of the main transit zones for the supply of weaponry and personnel on occasion via Iran, and it goes if it's a land convoy, it goes through Iraq, Syria, and sometimes it goes from Syria to Lebanon. Sometimes it's stored in bases in Syria for future use. But also Syria itself has become a zone that Iran identified as seeking to try and turn it into a war front in its own right, to create a second Hezbollah in southern Syria. And we're now seeing the IDF is building a route and an obstacle along the Israeli-Syrian border. This is a new development. And generally speaking, I think we're seeing the IDF prepare for scenarios in which the Iranians will try to deploy their Shiite militias and terrorists and Hezbollah's presence in Syria for some sort of future ground offensive cross-border attack. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. But Syria is absolutely at the heart of Iran's plans for the region, for projection of power. And whatever Assad may think of it, that's what's happening. I don't know what he can do really to stop it, because he's still very much dependent on the Iranians.
Thanks, Yaakov. And Badik Khan, I'll come back to you, because speaking about Assad, someone has just been nominated by Donald Trump. This is Tulsi Gabbard. She's been nominated National Security Advisor, and she is someone who has pretty vigorously defended Assad in the past. What is your reaction to hearing her name?
Well, I think we cannot see now more reactions from the Syrian society because it's maybe a little early for see what Tulsi Gabbard can do according to the connection between Syria and the USA. But according to 2017, that when Tulsi Gabbard met Bashar al-Assad, she thought and she was thinking that Bashar al-Assad is not an enemy. He doesn't see USA as an enemy for him, and she was thinking that maybe we can build a peaceful with the Syrian government, but we don't know, because always the politic issues are changing with the time. So we don't know what is Tulsi Gabbard to do. But I want to mention specifically about the northeastern part of Syria, specifically for the Kurds, because they had a bad experience with Trump. When Trump gave the green light to Turkey for enter the northeastern Syria. So the people, we are listening, we can see on the social media that the Kurdish people start to get worried about the Trump administration, but they are also saying at the same time, maybe it's early, and maybe we can wait for see what Trump can do for the Kurdish issue in northeastern Syria.
Yeah, I mean, on that, Badik, do you think it's fair to say that Iraqi Kurds seem a bit more optimistic about a new Trump presidency compared with the Syrian Kurds? Because, as you say, they have that very traumatic experience of when the US troops pulled out of Syria.
I think the situation between Iraqi Kurdistan and northeastern Syria is a little different, even about the politically, even about the militarily. Now the Kurdish society or northeastern Syria, they don't have a protection, international protection from Turkish airstrikes, because from a while to while we can see that Turkish is interfering in the northeastern Syria by attacking, by destroying the economic supplies or factories or public services. So I think we cannot compare, because it's a little different, the situation there.
Badik Khan, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Badik Khan Ahmad there.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about the other front in this war that Israel is fighting. Yemen's Houthis claiming to have launched fresh attacks today on American naval destroyers in the Red Sea. It's the second such claim this week, which the Pentagon has denied. Our Emma Siegel reports.
The U.S. is escalating its strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. On Thursday, the military released footage of a strike from earlier in the week targeting a missile launcher on what appears to be the back of a truck.
U.S. Central Command forces executed a series of precise airstrikes November 9 through 10 on multiple Houthi weapons storage facilities situated within Houthi-controlled territories in Yemen. These facilities housed a variety of advanced conventional weapons used by the Iran-backed Houthis to target U.S. and international military and civilian vessels.
In response, the Houthis said they targeted 2 U.S. Navy destroyers and the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, which arrived in the Middle East in late August. This marks a shift in tactics from targeting commercial ships to directly attacking American assets.
The Yemeni Houthi Armed Forces Missile Force and Air Force, with God's help, carried out 2 military operations. The first targeted the American aircraft carrier Abraham in the Arabian Sea using several cruise missiles and drones during American enemy preparations for hostile operations targeting our country. The operation achieved its objectives successfully by God's grace, and the American enemy's planned aerial attack on our country was thwarted. The second operation targeted 2 American destroyers in the Red Sea using several ballistic missiles and drones, and achieved its objectives successfully by God's grace.
But while the Houthis say it was a successful operation, the Pentagon says that the multiple missile attack was thwarted.
On November 11th, U.S. Central Command forces successfully repelled multiple Iranian-backed Houthi attacks during a transit of the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. During the transit, the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Stockdale and USS Spruance were attacked by at least 8 one-way attack uncrewed aerial systems, 5 anti-ship ballistic missiles, and 3 anti-ship cruise missiles, which were successfully engaged and defeated. The vessels were not damaged, no personnel were hurt.
The Pentagon also said that they were not aware of any attacks on the Abraham Lincoln carrier. This all comes as the UN Security Council on Wednesday unanimously adopted a resolution extending sanctions on Yemen for another 12 months. These sanctions were put in place to destabilize activity by the Houthi militia. But the Houthis have insisted that the attacks will continue as long as the Israel-Hamas war carries on.
Well, time for a short break. When we come back, we will switch the focus to Gaza to get an update on the fighting there. Yaakov Lapin is here with me. He'll take us through the very latest on that, and we'll be talking about what this means for the hostages following the release of that distressing hostage video, Sasha Chufanov seen in that video yesterday. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about 2 UN reports attacking Israel on both the death toll in Gaza and the amount of aid that is getting in. So stay tuned for that. That's next.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben-David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on i24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing i24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. And the IDF has challenged claims that it's restricting humanitarian aid into northern Gaza. UNRWA claimed this week that the situation for civilians in the north of Gaza was approaching a catastrophe. COGAT, which coordinates aid into Gaza, says this is false.
In terms of the letter sent from the US and Israel's response to it, the letter was sent to the political echelon and a response will be sent by the Israeli political echelon. What I can tell you is that on COGAT's level, we've been working very closely with the US throughout the entire war on increasing our capacity to facilitate humanitarian aid and to continue progressing those efforts. In recent months, we've seen several developments in terms of and the entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and we will continue to work with the US in order to improve those. So in terms of the replacement of UNRWA, in terms of the facilitation of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip, since the beginning of the war, slowly UNRWA has been phased out of different operations in terms of humanitarian aid, and other organizations have been taking their place, whether it be in terms of food or medical access to medical care and so on. We've been working with many different organizations, and it's important to understand that UNRWA doesn't have such a large impact right now in terms of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip right now. As I mentioned, there are different organizations that are working together with us, and we will continue working with them.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Yaakov Lapin is the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon. Thanks for staying with us, Yaakov. So let's talk about the issue of aid then, because this, of course, is very sensitive and it's garnered international headlines. It's no secret that the IDF is trying to stop aid from getting to Hamas, but of course it does want the aid to go to civilians. How can it manage this very delicate balancing act?
It can't really. It's sending aid into Gaza in large numbers. There are dozens of trucks going in every day. And then it's leaving it to the UN to pick up those trucks and get it over to the civilians. Now, there have been IDF attempts to secure the routes, sometimes from the air, sometimes from the ground, but these have been very sort of selective attempts. And right now, actually, we just heard from the IDF that there's something like 700 to 800 trucks that the UN hasn't been able to pick up. So the problem is not the amount going in. The problem is what happens when it gets there. On the one hand, the UN agencies, the international agencies, seem unable to deal with that quantity of trucks. There's a bottleneck. And the second and worse problem is that Hamas is continuing to hijack some of that aid. So one thing that the IDF has done recently is open up Kisufim crossing. That's on the border with southern Gaza, and that enables the trucks to reach the Al-Mawasi humanitarian zone in much less time, in a matter of minutes, something like 10, 15 minutes, according to some assessments that I've heard. And that's supposed to decrease the chances that Hamas has to hijack those trucks.
And is that working?
Well, they just did it now, and they say that the initial signs seem to be good, so we have to keep our eyes on that, but that may be one workaround. Personally, I'll just add, I think that the IDF and Israel need to make the decision to take over the distribution process, because I think that not only is that necessary, but also it serves Israel's war goal, because it will weaken Hamas politically. You know, their aspirations of being a regime is predicated on continuing to hijack this aid and telling the Gazans that they're relevant for Gaza's future. That's just my opinion, but that has not happened as of now. So we'll have to see.
Can Israel spare the manpower, though, to do that?
Well, I think so, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's not going to require that much manpower. You can also start building, some sort of cooperation agreement with the agencies in which the IDF would work with them to distribute the aid with ongoing continuous IDF protection. You know, I think there are all kinds of creative ways of doing this, but so far that decision has not been made by the cabinet, because the military leadership has been saying that we shouldn't do it, that we should, try and avoid that trap, because it would be the beginning of a sort of a military administration in the Gaza Strip. Military leadership here in Israel doesn't want that, and the cabinet has gone along with that reluctance so far.
It's a path they don't want to go down.
Right.
Yesterday there was that horrible video, Islamic Jihad releasing a video of hostage Sasha Trufanov, a proof of life, thankfully, that he's still alive. But also a reminder Israel is no closer to freeing them. And also on the aid issue, some analysts have said that the fact that he was forced to say we're short of water, we're short of aid, is a sign that the terrorists are not getting aid either. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my assumption is that whatever he's saying is designed to apply pressure and psychological warfare on the people of Israel and the decision makers of Israel. And I would prefer not to take anything that's said on videos like this at face value. But at the end of the day, I think that Hamas is able to steal the aid, and the problem with, the hostages remains a terrible, terrible sore on our national psyche, on the Israeli people. And, I think that the government is looking for ways to apply pressure on Hamas without caving to the demand to vacate the Gaza Strip for an unknown period of time, with the fear being that this would allow Hamas to come back and take over Gaza once again.
And before I let you go, there's been a lot of action this week in both northern and southern Gaza. Can you give us a sense of where we are in terms of finishing off Hamas? Because it's been going on for over a year now. We're hearing about, all the time, hundreds of terrorists being killed or eliminated. Where are we in terms of making Gaza an area where Hamas can no longer control it?
Right. So, look, Hamas as a centralized terror army is actually no longer in existence. What we have are localized terror cells that are really struggle to communicate with the central Hamas military leadership. Muhammad Sinwar, Yehi's brother, and those around him are trying to set up, a new kind of command structure, but they're really not succeeding. But what we do have, we should really look out at what's going on in Jabalia. In Jabalia, this was an area where for 8 months the IDF did not maneuver. It went back in there on October 5th, and it hasn't left. And it's actually done a very significant operation in northern Gaza. And this operation is aimed at making sure that Hamas doesn't ever return to this area as an organized terror army and even as an unorganized guerrilla force. The goal of the IDF is to prevent it from coming back. So they are going street by street, house by house. They're encountering massive amounts of explosives. They've killed over 1,000 terrorists. They've arrested about the same number. 64,000 civilians have left that area, gone to the Amawasi area. And that has happened against the will of Hamas. Hamas, for the first 10 days...
Right, they wanted to hold the civilians there.
Hold them as human shields, and they said to them, don't go. And they also shot several civilians in the legs who tried to leave. The civilians themselves have said that on camera, that has happened. And one of the most harrowing scenes that IDF sources are describing is terrorists holed up in structures with their families and telling their families, you're not leaving, you're going to be with me, you're going to be my human shield, even in the knowledge that this will likely lead to the death of everybody involved. They are keeping them there as a kind of, basically last stand. Very, very brutal, savage scenes going on there. But at the end of the day, the Hamas stronghold in Jabalia has almost been completely torn apart. What's left there are about 200 terrorists are left. So that's a major, major development, and that's happening in Jabalia in northern Gaza as we speak.
And give us a sense of a timeline when you think this might be at a turning point.
So, the IDF sources don't want to commit to a timeline. They'll say we'll be here as long as necessary, but it seems to me like in the coming weeks, whatever's left of Hamas's presence in northern Gaza is going to collapse. And then, it seems that with the absence of civilians, nobody's going to be allowed to come back there until the IDF finds a way to make sure that it's only civilians coming back. That'll be the next step. That's also a government decision, but it looks like a matter of weeks before there's not much left of Hamas at all in northern Gaza.
A matter of weeks. All right, Yaakov, great to get your analysis as always. Thank you very much indeed. Yaakov Lapin there. Well, a new UN report out this week claims that 70% of those killed in the war in Gaza were women and children. The report, which heavily criticises Israel, made headlines around the world. But with less than 20% of the total number of fatalities in Gaza actually verified, many analysts are questioning not only the methodology and the conclusions in the report, but also the intent. Our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has this report.
Images of bodies in bloody blankets after another Israeli attack in Gaza. Young Israeli soldiers forced into a terrible but necessary war, killed in combat. Heartbreaking reports of civilian suffering and death. The stories from the ground in Gaza are tough, but they're also drowning in misinformation, falsehoods, and different narratives. The international community listens to the United Nations. This Friday, the UN issued a report saying nearly 70% of those killed in Gaza were women and children. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza reports that around 44,000 people have been killed since the beginning of the war. Not distinguishing between fighters and civilians, they claim most are women and children. But less than 20% of the total number of deaths in the war has been independently verified so far. By September 2024, the UN Human Rights Council had been able to confirm 8,119 deaths.
As of now, we have about 10,000 fatalities that we verified, including 4,700 children. That's about 45%. and 2,461 women. That's about 25%. So the overall 70% women and children remains for now.
When they say children, it's everyone under 18, and we know that there's a clear trend for Hamas using child fighters. And if we look at the breakdown of the 43,344 that Hamas are claiming, we can see clear demographic spikes in males between the ages of about 15 and 50, which to me suggests that the IDF are targeting males, which suggests they're targeting fighters.
Gaza's authorities are almost entirely run by Hamas, and the ongoing war makes the independent identification process difficult, causing many statisticians and analysts to question the accuracy of the numbers presented in the report.
The next thing we need to look at is the methodology the UN have used for this report. They've only looked at 8,119 names. And they've said they're verified, which is also very tricky because any verification that takes place in Gaza is clearly going to be tainted by Hamas. They still run a significant part of the Gaza Strip in spite of the IDF's best efforts.
The UN stands by the numbers.
The MOH figures compared with ours in the last escalation, several escalations have matched and they've come very close. So we do not have reasons to believe that this time it's very different. The numbers are, of course, massive compared to previous years. So we do need time to catch up and verify.
The UN based the verification on having 3 independent sources or witnesses to a death, typically neighbors or family members. Almost 90% of their verified fatalities were from large incidents, where at least 5 people were killed.
And what that specifically excludes is any events where casualties were incurred with no witnesses, i.e. people who were in combat with the IDF at the time of dying. So it's a heavily skewed report. And as I said, totally at odds even with Hamas's own numbers.
2 weeks ago, at a UN committee meeting on Palestinian rights, UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese was clear in her criticism of Israel.
No one has been spared, not just among the Palestinians and the Lebanese, even in the United Nations. And it's because of that, on top of the genocide and on top of the 57 years of unlawful occupation, that I say it's time to consider suspending the credential of Israel as a member state.
Albanese, who has been accused of anti-Israel bias, spoke to members which include Afghanistan, Venezuela, and Pakistan.
I understand the sensitivity because none of you has really clean hands when it comes to human rights. That's okay, but no one else has maintained an unlawful occupation violating decades of UN Security Council, General Assembly, Human Rights Council, International Court of Justice, decision and resolutions as Israel has done. Enough.
According to Andrew Fox, the report speaks to a larger issue, the anti-Israel narrative that permeates the UN.
Hamas seem to have been completely deleted from the conversation. It's as if there's a war happening in Gaza just because, and there was nothing behind it, and there's nobody being fought, and it's just Israel going in and blowing huge chunks of Rafah or Khan Yunis or Gaza City off the map for reasons that are kind of unspecified. And it's a very strange narrative. So when they say verified and then they drop 70% in there, it's such a clearly anti-Israel bias. On top of being, a gross failure of the most basic data collection and analysis principles. You wouldn't pass a high school exam with the level of methodology they've brought to this report.
Israel claims around 18,000 Hamas members have been killed in the war and says approximately 1 civilian has been killed for every fighter, a number it blames on Hamas, showing repeatedly that Hamas hides in hospitals, schools, and homes, using civilians as human shields. But for now, protests against Israel are ongoing around the world as the number of anti-Semitic incidents continues to grow.
Well, another death toll that's getting a great deal less attention on the world stage, that is the death toll in Sudan, which could be as much as 3 times higher than previously thought. More than 61,000 people have been killed in Khartoum state. That's according to a report by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine's Sudan Research Group. And today, Amnesty International claimed that it had evidence that France had been breaking a weapons embargo to Sudan. It says the RSF militia were using vehicles in Darfur supplied by the United Arab Emirates and fitted with French hardware. We're here to talk about all of that. Ambassador Michael Salin is the former Swedish envoy to Sudan and is now at the Stockholm Shalom International Peace Research Institute. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So what has happened here? Why do you think the world has been underestimating the death toll in Sudan so substantially?
It amazes me, and I don't have a clear explanation for it. It was news for me today that this new number came up. So I don't think that there is any particular reason other than the general problem that the world has tended to forget about Sudan and focus on, for example, what you had on your show just before this. The incredible numbers, struggles about how many were dead in Gaza and everything. So I think it is an underestimation of, or an under ambition to really find out the real things, because there hasn't been much enough attention paid to it. That's my only answer to this surprise numbers that have been. But it's highly, highly disturbing and highly, highly worrying, of course, that this is so much bigger. I've been worried enough with the figures that we've seen so far, but now with this, it's incredible.
And given the nature of the conflict in Sudan, it would appear that a large proportion of those casualties are civilians.
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. So we can count on it to be civilians. Of course, there are many military or militiamen killed also, but if I were to estimate, my best estimate would be perhaps 4/5 or something would be civilian in a conflict like this. But this is my best guess right now.
I mean, we're hearing about ethnic-based massacres, people being targeted because of who they are, because of their race and ethnicity. Yet we are hearing barely anything at all from the United Nations, from any of these aid agencies, the ICC, the ICJ, they're all silent. Why has the world abandoned Sudan?
I think it's a question of double fatigue. Fatigue in the sense of having been through so many decades, generations of civil war in Sudan. Somehow there is a certain fatigue that you can't do much about Sudan. Poor Sudan, it always falls into, and that applies, by the way, to South Sudan as well, or the former.
But that's also the case between Israel and the Palestinians. This is a conflict that's been going on for decades, and it certainly receives no shortage of attention.
Yeah, but my second fatigue measurement would be to say that with the world being so disturbed, generally you have a sort of a global collapse in many ways, no meaningful means of communication between the various sides, east, west, north, south. It's a very complicated world situation. The Security Council of the UN is somehow, is blocked by the East-West conflict that we have now. So, and then you have the wars in Ukraine, and you have the wars in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon. So I guess you have to find the answer in this double fatigue, which makes Sudan a little bit unique, that it has those double reasons for fatigue. Fatigue is the right word.
The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has sought to lecture Israel on the way it is prosecuting the war against terrorists in Lebanon and in Gaza. Yet we find out today via Amnesty International that France may have been providing the RSF militia, the group that is responsible for some of the worst violence in Sudan, with arms. What do you think happened there?
Well, I mean, I'm completely cynical when it comes to the way arms flows, like water finds its ways in various ways. So hard to detect exactly where it comes from and by what intermediary means, etc., etc. In this particular case, from what I've been reading today, it is French-made arms finding its way to UAE, the Emiratis, who have been accused by some, certainly the regular army of Sudan, to be supplying arms to the RSF side. So, and there is a long tradition of French-UAE arms cooperation. I saw figures in terms of billions of dollars for the last 10 years or so. So I guess the key here is French, UAE, and then UAE contacts for various reasons with the various partners or parties in the conflict in Sudan. So I guess that the disclaimer from France would be that we have no clue because this is an independent industry that has supplied legitimately our partner UAE with weapons, and then what can we say? So the discussion now is, could there be more pressure on France to make sure that there is an end user certificate clearly defined so that France would actively prevent the resupply via UAE or someone else into the conflict zone in Sudan. But these things are complicated.
Absolutely. And I should say the UAE denies that it has been arming the RSF, just to point that out. Yes. Well, Ambassador Michael Sallin, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, despite being at war on multiple fronts, Israel is taking part in the COP29 climate talks in Baku, Azerbaijan. Israel is a world leader in climate innovation and water management. Some 20 agricultural startups are accompanying the delegation. Israel says it has a lot to offer the region and the world when it comes to fighting climate change. Well, let's go now live to Baku. We're joined by Rafi Morav, the Ambassador for Climate and Economic Diplomacy at the Israeli Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for being with us and joining us all the way from Baku. And first of all, I mean, given the levels of outright hostility levelled at Israel right now, has it been a struggle for you to find partners to discuss the great innovations that Israel has?
Good evening. Not really. The climate crisis is the most important crisis that humanity is facing, and this is what we are all concentrating here. And conflicts, regional one or local ones, are left behind. Not that they are ignored, but they are not really overshadowing our activity here. We had today and also yesterday various signatures of MOUs and bilateral meetings with various countries. And the need to join forces in order to cope with the climate crisis is very important, and we all have to make out this effort. So, and Israel has, as you mentioned, is really a champion in climate tech innovation. So we have a lot to offer to the world in terms of solutions to the crisis.
Right, and particularly pertinent for this part of the world, of course, is water, access to clean water. And that's where Israel has the edge, hasn't it, because of its desalination technology. Is that something that's being talked about?
Yes, but we have really tremendous technologies with the 20 companies that have been selected to showcase the Israeli innovations. So you have of course, water technologies and precise agriculture, but as well as monitoring methane leakage or seeds resistant to drought, recycling of textiles, treatment of public health waste, and so on. So we really cover very large scale of technologies that are under this definition of climate ecotech, which are all helping to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases and also to adapt to the climate change.
Are you? I was going to ask you, are you worried about the targets of cutting global carbon emissions? Donald Trump coming back to the White House, of course, and many other changes around the globe?
We hope that, of course, the U.S. will remain committed to the global effort to mitigate emissions. That's a global effort, and of course, the U.S. has a strong contribution to do to this effort.
But the world has changed, hasn't it? I mean, we've got war, of course, here, but also between Russia and Ukraine, and energy has become a priority for many nations.
Indeed, but the energy can be green energy. And that's what we all want to make it available and to make it economically viable. And the technology is already available. The main challenge is to deploy it.
Rafi Morav, great to talk to you. Good luck with the rest of the summit, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of Middle East Now. Do stay with us, of course, on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David is here next with the rundown. from me and the team. Thanks for watching and good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing i24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
Welcome to the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. A response from Lebanon to the latest proposal for a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah may come within the next day. This according to reports, and the response could be a positive one. Israeli Energy Minister Eli Cohen seemingly confirming those reports, telling Reuters, quote, "I think we are at a point that we are closer to an arrangement than we have been since the start of the war." Now, this comes after Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer was in Washington earlier this week, huddling with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other officials involved in mediating a truce proposal. Meanwhile, a day after announcing the death of 6 IDF soldiers killed in combat in South Lebanon, another combat fatality there. Lieutenant Ivry Dickstein, 21, a platoon commander in the Golani Brigade, killed in a firefight with Hezbollah gunmen. May his memory be a blessing. Meanwhile, the IDF struck at the heart of Hezbollah in Beirut, bombing several structures in the Lebanese capital used by the Iran-backed terror organization. Israeli airstrikes also reported in Damascus, this time striking targets there associated with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Balia Sladin. He is in northern Israel, near the Lebanon border. Balia, let's first talk about this potential of a truce proposal. Of course, we don't know how Hezbollah is going to react to that, but maybe the first real sign of light in the fighting there.
Yes, exactly. So after maybe a week of lots of optimism toward or in regards of this possible truce or ceasefire proposal or agreement with Lebanon or with Hezbollah, now we're getting more details about what could be the only obstacle for it right now. So the fact that Israel is still insisting on enforcing the UN Resolution 1701 is the main obstacle. From what we understand, and according to the latest reports, the U.S. is proposing that if Hezbollah violates this UN resolution, so violates the agreement, then some sort of a committee would tell or would actually look into the violation and then inform the UNIFIL. The UNIFIL will then inform the Lebanese army, and if the Lebanese army doesn't do anything in regards to that violation, to that specific violation by Hezbollah, then it would be guaranteed for the Israelis to intervene and actually do something about it, so enforce the UN resolutions themselves. That specific thing is something that the Lebanese until now are still not accepting, and of course Hezbollah is not accepting as well, and that's the obstacle from what we understand and according to the latest reports. So maybe this would be resolved in the coming 24 hours, but for now we're not very optimistic about the possibility that we're going to hear yes from Hezbollah and then from the Lebanese government about this proposal.
Right, and meanwhile, Balia, more fire from Lebanon into northern Israel, including another drone attack and air attacks by Israel in Beirut, and an admitted air attack, something Israel doesn't always admit to, in the heart of Damascus.
Yes, exactly. So let's start with the drone attack. So after 40 minutes with sirens all over the western Galilee and even in Haifa and south of Haifa, the drone fell in the area of Eliakim, from the health authorities in Israel. So Mara is saying that 2 people were moderately injured as a result of that attack or that drone that fell there. So for now, that's what we are getting in regards to that specific incident, that yet again emphasizes the challenges for the Israeli air defense to actually intercept these drones, something that the air defense system has or at least is getting better at. About 80 or more % of the drones are intercepted, but the rest are of course imposing that challenge. Now in regards to the heavy bombardment of El Dahia in Beirut, that's of course part of the pressure that Israel is putting on Hezbollah. and also today in Damascus, after we were talking about a building that was hit, the IDF took responsibility for it, and that is, of course, rarely happens. We're talking about an area in the heart of Damascus, the capital of Syria. The IDF is saying that a command center that belongs to the Islamic Jihad was the target from the Syrian officials. We understand that at least 15 people were killed and many others were injured. And now in the past few minutes as well, we're also hearing reports about another attack on Al-Qusayr area in Syria, the area that is right on the Lebanese-Syrian border. Maybe that's also the efforts of the Israelis to stop or prevent Hezbollah from conveying weapons from Syria to Lebanon.
All right, Balias Ladin in northern Israel, thank you for that. Of course, the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari expected to talk in a few minutes. He may be talking about those Israeli air attacks on Beirut and Damascus. Joining us in studio with Neri Zilber, advisor at the Israel Policy Forum and a host at Israel Policy Pod. And we also have joining us from Tel Aviv, Dr. Meir Javan-Danfor. He's an Iran lecturer at Reichman University. And Neri, it does sound, if really the last issue has to be decided is the exact wording of the circumstances where Israel can intervene in South Lebanon, if that's the issue, it does seem we may really be close to some kind of an agreement here.
We may be, and there's always room for optimism, but I'd be a bit careful in thinking this is a done deal just yet. That point that you raised in terms of allowing Israel essentially free rein to intervene inside Lebanon if they see a violation by Hezbollah is not a minor point. It's not a minor point in terms of the substance, Israel actually striking inside Lebanon. It's not a minor point for the Lebanese and really Hezbollah to accept politically. It would be a major come down on that side of the Lebanese border. We'd also have to take into account that these reports that we're hearing really over the past few hours are coming from one source, and that's really the Israeli government and the circles close to the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't want to say it's complete spin. Again, we need to be optimistic, but I think there are other reasons having to do with other issues in the news at the moment for Netanyahu to want this to be out there in the media bloodstream.
Yeah, the Prime Minister's legal issues and political troubles.
Yes. And 7 IDF killed. And
exactly, the heavy casualties.
But I will say, in terms of optimism, what we may see in the coming days will be only a partial first implementation of what we understand to be the ceasefire draft proposal. In the beginning, it's not a full ceasefire. It's a 60-day halt to hostilities on the part of Hezbollah and the IDF. That may be something that both sides can agree to, and that'll take us right up to the inauguration of the new president in America, Donald J. Trump.
Right, who wants to see these conflicts resolved before he takes office. And Mayor, of course, beyond Hezbollah is Iran, and which would not be proceeding with any kind of agreement without getting at least Tehran's okay on that. And there maybe is an indication, though, of a larger shifting patterns here in the region as, for example, given the change of the U.S. government. I mean, it would mean, for example, a decoupling of Hezbollah's attacks on Israel from the conflict in Gaza, which is no small thing.
Absolutely. You put your finger right on the most important matter here. If this... I share Neri's realism here in that we should be very careful, and nothing is done until it's done. And we have to wait for the agreement, but it would be a setback for the Islamic Republic. One of the reasons why it sent Hezbollah to fight Israel on October 8th was so that it pressures Israel on the northern front. And this is why it linked the issue of Gaza ceasefire to a ceasefire in Lebanon. It wanted to use Hezbollah in order to force Israel to stop attacking Gaza and stop attacking Hamas, more importantly, as soon as possible. And therefore, if there is a ceasefire in Lebanon without a ceasefire in Gaza, then it goes to show that Iran's plans face a setback in Gaza and, of course, in Lebanon itself. And these have to do with a number of reasons. This would have to do with a number of reasons, one of them being the deteriorating fighting capabilities of Hezbollah, the other being Iran's deteriorating economic situation. I mean, Khaled, somebody's going to have to pay for all these damages in southern Lebanon. and for the rearmament of Hezbollah and rebuilding of Hezbollah again. With the Iranian rial reaching a new low and Iran's economy deteriorating even further, I think these also would play a part in a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, should it come to pass.
All right, Mayor Neri, stay with us, because we're talking about issues involving Iran and the sort of bigger picture involved here that may be impacting the region, which is Donald Trump preparing to return to the White House, which may have Iran rethinking some of the key policies that have guided its actions in the region. There are reports now that claim that following Trump's re-election, the Iranian regime decided to postpone its threatened attack on Israel. And now, as the International Atomic Energy Agency is preparing to take action against Tehran over its nuclear program, the Iranian president has told the visiting head of the UN nuclear watchdog his government is ready to resolve, quote, ambiguities and doubts about its atomic program and re-engage in nuclear negotiations with the incoming Trump administration. So is Iran really shifting its course somewhat? Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran takes a closer look.
Iran appears to be shifting its strategy, at least in the short term, ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House. Sky News in Arabic reported that Iran has decided to postpone its vowed attack against Israel following the results of the U.S. presidential elections. That, of course, doesn't mean Tehran won't continue with its threats.
We will fight you to the end and will not allow you to control and dictate the fate of Muslims. We will take revenge and you will receive painful blows. Wait for our response.
Iran was also stonewalled by Iraq after Baghdad refused to allow use of its territory and airspace to launch attacks against Israel. All the while, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq have increased the rate of daily drone launches at Israeli territory. Iran's foreign minister struck a different tone, signaling openness to engage with the incoming Trump administration.
We have differences with the Americans, which are sometimes very fundamental and central and may not be resolved, but we must manage them to reduce their costs and decrease the tensions. Communication channels with the Americans remain open.
Araghchi added that Iran is ready to negotiate with the United States over its nuclear program, as the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, visits Tehran in a push to restore access of inspectors to Iran's nuclear sites.
We know each other well, and we know that it is indispensable to get, at this point in time, to some concrete, tangible, visible results that will indicate that this joint work is improving the situation, is bringing clarification to things, and in a general sense is moving us away from conflict and ultimately war.
But significant gaps remain as some European powers are pushing to take action against Iran at the next IAEA Board of Governors meeting next week.
Any interventionist resolution in the nuclear affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran will definitely be met with immediate countermeasures.
Grossi says he will visit important nuclear facilities in Fordow and Natanz on Friday. Whether that will lead to the return of IAEA inspectors remains to be seen.
Mayor, we discussed perhaps Iran shifting course somewhat when it comes to Hezbollah's posture in Lebanon, but a much bigger issue for the region, and certainly for Israel, is the Iranian nuclear program. Is it possible that they would engage with Donald Trump, the president, who basically, from their perspective, violated and broke the Iran nuclear agreement they had negotiated with the Obama administration?
Caleb, you forgot to add that they also that the Americans, that Trump also killed Qasem Soleimani. Let's add that.
Yes, another thing. Yes,
that's much more important for Ayatollah Khamenei personally, but also Trump really embarrassed Ayatollah Khamenei also by walking out of the nuclear deal. And the surprising answer to that question, because of the things that Trump did before, is that yes, it seems that the Iranians are getting ready to talk. Of course, it's not up to President Pezeshkian. I think if it were up to him, there would be a deal very easily. President Pezeshkian, he wants to improve Iran's economy. He knows how bad the situation is regarding Iran's economy, but he cannot approve policy or decisions regarding negotiations with the US. But I think Ayatollah Khamenei is becoming concerned not only because of Iran becoming weakened by Israel in the region and Iran's economic situation deteriorating, there's also another reason that's adding to his concern. And that is the friendly relations between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. If the aforementioned two reach a deal over Ukraine and the Ukraine war stops, Putin will no longer need Iran's UAVs or missiles or other equipment. That would mean Putin moving away from Iran towards Trump and possibly even giving up some of the protection that Putin provided for Iran, at least diplomatically. That would also leave Iran even more exposed. So I think that this also plays a part, alongside the other reasons I mentioned, into why the Iranians are ready to negotiate with Trump and possibly reach a deal.
All right, interesting to see how that will play out. Meir Javan Danforth, thank you for joining us on I-24 News. And Neri, I want to get your perspective on that. I mean, Donald Trump, you look at, we'll talk about some of his other appointments later. He's appointed Iran hawks to some key foreign policy positions like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz. But he has said that he's willing to talk with Iran and try to reach some kind of deal. I mean, is it possible the man who sunk the first Iran agreement could craft a new one?
He could. I think the details will matter in terms of a negotiation and ultimate deal. But Trump has been very upfront and transparent about the fact that he didn't like the previous deal because Obama concluded it. But he wasn't against a deal with Iran in principle. He just wanted to apply maximum pressure, as he called it, on Iran to make it come to the table. That did not work in Trump's first term. My sense is that this new administration coming in just 2 months will likely attempt the same maneuver and perhaps reach the negotiating table. As Meir said, Iran's position overall, whether in terms of its proxies in the region or economically at home, not great. And then you add on top of that the Israeli strikes, especially of last month. Their position is weaker than it was a year ago. I'd argue it's weaker now than it was when Trump left office several years ago. So we have to keep that in mind. But Trump, as he said, after his election victory last week, he doesn't start wars, he wants to end wars. So I think a lot of those Iran hawks that he's appointed to those very senior cabinet posts will be disappointed if they think he's going to just greenlight strikes on Iran. That goes double for the current Israeli government.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see, again, as I say, how that plays out between Tehran and Washington and how Israel responds. Let's move now to the war in the South. A new United Nations report is claiming that 70% of those killed in the war in Gaza have been women and children. Now, the report, which heavily criticizes Israel, has made headlines around the world, but with less than 20% of the total number of fatalities in Gaza actually verified, many analysts are questioning not just the methodology and conclusions, but its intent. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini breaks it down.
Images of bodies in bloody blankets after another Israeli attack in Gaza. Young Israeli soldiers forced into a terrible but necessary war, killed in combat. Heartbreaking reports of civilian suffering and death. The stories from the ground in Gaza are tough, but they're also drowning in misinformation, falsehoods, and different narratives. The international community listens to the United Nations.
Well, let's go now to the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari.
Staff Sergeant Dror Chen, Staff Sergeant Nir Goffer, Staff Sergeant Sharia Albom, Captain Itai Markovich, and more, who died last night in the Gaza. And this evening, Captain Ivri Dickstein, may their memory be blessed. The combatants went out to fight in the Kasbah in South Lebanon and to try and clear out all the launch pads and all the rockets that were going to hit out at Israel. Before our forces came on, it is a war arena. There is an enemy there. There was tank shooting against this structure before they came in, but they were fighting inside and hiding, but in a fight from close contact. They actually managed to fight very bravely, and 7 of our combatants were killed. There is a very heavy price to pay in this war. All this is extremely important in order to ensure our future security. They are fighting with accountability in order to try and retain the security and the safety of our warriors. We are embracing those families who are suffering such horrific loss. We will continue accompanying them throughout. We are trying to find every sign of the infrastructure of terrorists, and we are eliminating them. They are causing tremendous threats against those in the north of Israel. They're working methodically in order to eliminate all their capabilities, so that they will not be able to launch their missiles against us and fight against us. So we are doing so accompanied by fire from the Air Force as well. These are spaces where we identified that they were shooting to the north of Israel as well. In the south of Lebanon, we have identified what they were doing and we have eliminated. It was the village of Kile, which had turned into an outpost for terror. It was adjacent, just 500 meters away from so many of our villages. They were preparing for the Radwan forces. These red structures symbolize all the infrastructure for terror that they built in this village. Nearly in every single house, there was the infrastructure for terror. You can see it was all prepared. And underneath the village, they excavated a tunnel in order to prepare themselves, so that before they would then invade the north of Israel. Our forces disclosed they found this tunnel and destroyed it. With the help of snipers and with the launching of missiles, they were shooting at all the localities in the north of Israel. And all those launch pads were identified and found by our forces. They were working in the Kila village as in additional villages in the south of Lebanon, so they exposed dozens of additional underground infrastructure that they had prepared, including all the arms and the equipment of the Radwan. We're continuing attacking from the air as well, all over Lebanon, from Dahya all the way to Damascus. This week, we hit over 300 targets in Lebanon, including 40 in Dahya. We're talking about caches of arms and batteries of missiles, and we destroyed nearly all the areas where they were being manufactured, and we're continuing hitting out at whatever was left behind. We have identified that there are rockets and other arms that the Hezbollah is launching against the state of Israel that were manufactured in Syria and transferred from Syria to Lebanon to the Hezbollah. We'll hit out at any infrastructure in Syria that we identify that was aimed at preparing and manufacturing arms and missiles for the Hezbollah. Yesterday, we identified them where they were also being smuggled through Syria, through Iran into Syria. We are in a state of war, and while everyone is with boots on the ground in the field, we are trying to protect the people in the north. 2 soldiers were killed in Eliakim this evening because of an explosive UAV that managed to actually hit out at Eliakim. We are continuing 24/7 in order to thwart all threats, to find out exactly what is going on, and based on all the directives of the front command, the home front command, then people have been saved. So you have to adhere to it. There were terrible battles in Jabalia in the Gaza, and we lost 5 of our commanders and soldiers. In the Gaza Strip, in the center of it, they're carrying out in Notzorat and in the south of the Gaza Strip, there are also fighting has been going on as well. We're trying to create a situation where the situation would be better and people would be able to live in the south of the Gaza enclosure and in the south. 101 of our hostages are being held captive in horrific conditions, extremely difficult, most of them underground. 405 days they have been there. Many of them are still alive and they are waiting for so long to come home. Sasha Antupov, yesterday they published a sign of life from him. We are doing our utmost so that they will come home and embrace their families. We will do everything possible to also bring those who have died to be buried in Israel. That is our top priority. It is one of the most important of our priorities that was defined as such by our new Minister of Defense, Israel Katz. I would like to read out a message that was given to me by the sister of Captain Nizri, who was killed heroically in battle in Jabalia last month. And his sister, twin sister, said, "You will not beat us. You will not manage to extinguish our energy, our spirit, and our ability. The IDF at this time needs every part of Israeli society holding up all those values and with one objective, the security of the whole state of Israel." From Channel 11, it was actually said today, it was published, that the head of the team in the Prime Minister's office was trying to change the announcement given on the 7th of October. What do you know about this announcement on the 7th of October and the events that took place? IDF will present all the findings in a transparent manner after all the investigations and debriefings have taken place, and I commit to that. The Minister of Defense said this week
and that was Daniel Hagari giving a briefing mainly on combat activities in Lebanon. I do want to correct, there was a mistranslation saying 2 soldiers had been killed by a drone attack in Eliakim. In fact, they were wounded in moderate condition, apparently, from that drone attack. Now, Daniel Hagari also did speak about the situation in Gaza. He briefly referenced the conditions of the civilian population there. Now, some international aid organization groups are criticizing the U.S. for yesterday declaring that Israel had significantly increased the flow of goods into the Gaza Strip and taken other steps to ease the humanitarian situation there. Enough so the Biden administration did not carry out a threatened reduction of arms shipments, that deadline, of course, being yesterday. But Israel is insisting it is doing what it can to get more aid into Gaza, with the biggest problem being Hamas's continued efforts to seize what supplies it can and threaten the security of those bringing it in. Joining us now is Shimon Friedman. He is the spokesperson for COGAT, which is the organization, defense organization that deals with the civilian population in Gaza and also in the West Bank. And Shimon, let's talk about the aid, steps of aid that have been taken, because the U.S. did, on one hand, they did say these have met not every criteria we set out, but enough that we are not going to take any measures that they had threatened.
So I think it's important to understand that Israel continuously assesses the situation on the ground in the Gaza Strip and accordingly changes and improves its capacity to facilitate humanitarian aid. And this has been true since the beginning of the war, not just in recent weeks. We started with having one crossing going into the Gaza Strip. There are now 5 operating, with Kisufim opening just this week, and many different steps that have been taken to increase our capacity to see humanitarian aid get to where it needs to get to. In addition to seeing Kisufim open in recent weeks, what we're actually seeing play out right now is a new plan to see additional aid for the winter make its way into the Gaza Strip. And this is something that Israel has been urging the international organizations to do for months, and we've been working together with them on this plan. And we're now seeing that happen with vaccination campaigns happening, fixing roads so that they are fit for winter, and also bringing in specific aid to meet conditions of the winter. So there's lots of different things that we're doing based on our assessment of the situation on the ground.
Right. And of course, one of the challenges, and we've seen the dramatic increase in trucks going into these different crossings that should now increase. But a major problem still seems to be, once that aid crosses into Gaza, getting it to the population, especially given the breakdown of infrastructure there and the threat posed still by active Hamas groups that are trying to intercept and seize that aid.
So I absolutely agree with you that distribution is the biggest problem we're seeing right now. And in fact, right now on the Gazan side of the Kerem Shalom crossing, we're seeing between 800 and 900 trucks worth of aid. This is aid that's already been inspected by Israel, has been delivered to the Gazan side of the border, and is waiting to be picked up by the international organizations and distributed. But this, as you mentioned, is a problem also because of looting. Which is something that we are doing whatever we can to assist with, working together with the international organizations on that, creating additional routes for them to go on and so on. But it's also an issue of logistics. And the international organizations, unfortunately, just aren't doing enough to improve their capacity to facilitate the humanitarian aid and distribute it throughout the Gaza Strip.
Well, let's talk about that, because there is that problem of just logistics. There also is the problem of, for example, Israel's issues with UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which it feels has been non-productive in many areas, including having some of its employees collaborate with Hamas, even on October 7th. Is there an alternative structure? Is COGAT involved in some kind of efforts to create some kind of alternative structure that can carry on into what we call the day after in Gaza?
I think that there's a misconception when it comes to UNRWA, and I think people seem to think that they play a major role in terms of humanitarian efforts in the Gaza Strip, and that's just not true. It wasn't true before October 7th, and it definitely isn't true today. We see many different organizations operating within the Gaza Strip, organizations that we are working with to facilitate all different kinds of humanitarian aid, whether it be access to medical care or the entrance of food and other things like that. So there are a variety of organizations that we are working with. And as you mentioned, UNRWA members have been associated with terror, and that's why they've been phased out.
And are there local Palestinians? Because ultimately this is going to have to be in the hands of the local Palestinian population. Is COGAT finding partners among the local Palestinian population, given some of the complications there, including, as I said, the continuing threat of Hamas?
Right now, we're focused on working with the international organizations to find solutions and making sure that humanitarian aid is getting to where it needs to get to.
All right, Shimon Friedman of COGAT, thank you for joining us on I-24 News. We're going to turn now to the United States, where, after a week in which Donald Trump has generally won praise from fellow Republicans, even some Democrats, over the appointments for his administration, well, that came to a crashing halt last night with his selection of Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz to be the next Attorney General. The choice of Gaetz, who has been under investigation by the House Ethics Committee on allegations of sex trafficking, a minor, and drug use, as the nation's top law enforcement official, drew criticism from all quarters, including Republicans. That also includes American Jewish groups who pointed at Gaetz's invitation to a noted Holocaust denier to be his guest at the 2018 State of the Union address, his calling the Anti-Defamation League a racist organization for his criticism of Tucker Carlson, and his opposition this year to a bill countering anti-Semitism because he argued it condemned the view that the Jews killed Jesus. Well, the ADL said Gaetz has a long history of trafficking in anti-Semitism. The American Jewish Committee declared, quote, "We need someone at the helm of the Department of Justice who will tackle anti-Semitism, not peddle in it."
Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who is right now at the gathering of the Jewish National Fund Global Conference in Dallas, Texas. We'll talk more about that JNF in a minute, Mike, but I want to get your reaction on maybe what you're hearing about the appointment of Gates coming after a week in which Jewish organizations generally had been giving praise to President Trump for some of, for example, his foreign policy appointments.
That makes it especially stark. You know, you got to pick your battles, and when you're winning a bunch of battles, it makes it all the more, jump out when the Jewish community in America is reacting the way they've reacted to Gates' nomination for Attorney General. Very rarely do Jewish organizations just speak out in any sort of negative way against a Democratic or a Republican nominee within a presidential cabinet. So this all makes for even more of a newsworthy story here. The American Jewish Committee, nonpartisan organization, said, at a historic time, the levels of anti-Semitism running rampant right now, that putting someone at the Department of Justice, at the helm of the Department of Justice, who handles matters of anti-Semitism prosecution and shaping the laws regarding this matter, they don't want someone that's going to peddle in it, and they're urging right now President-elect Trump to reconsider, this is their word, reconsider the nomination. Otherwise, they say, the Senate has a responsibility to reject it. Whether the Senate can muster up the 4 or so Republican votes necessary, still to be determined, but there is a lot of moaning and groaning right now within the Senate, especially within establishment Republicans in the Senate, about this nomination and what it means going forward, although no one has committed as of yet to outright rejecting it. Meanwhile, Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, repeated that Gates has a long history of trafficking in anti-Semitism, things the ADL has brought up before. Greenblatt said he should not be appointed to any high office, much less one overseeing the impartial execution of our nation's laws. So just a couple Jewish groups jumping into the fray here to try to disavow, or at least try to persuade Trump to change his mind, or at least consider doing so, Kalev.
Right. And let's talk a little about the JNF gathering, a major JNF, of course. Major bridge philanthropic organization, but for the United States, the diaspora, the Jewish community, global Jewish community in Israel. Most people know JNF about planting trees in Israel, of course, does much more than that. And, of course, this coming at a time when the ties between American Jews and Israel are under scrutiny and under strain, and in a period of challenge, we might say.
It is a period of challenge, but as many at JNF that I've spoken with already since landing in Dallas here this morning have said, the last year has provided an opportunity under very difficult circumstances, obviously, to bridge those gaps. There's been a chasm between Israeli Jewry and American Jewry, diaspora Jewry, growing for quite some time as more and more Israeli Jews are born in Israel. They don't have that diaspora experience. But now with American Jewry and diaspora Jewry at large stepping up and coming, in some cases, to the rescue in terms of financial help, in terms of moral support to Israel at their darkest hour. And Israeli Jews, I've heard from several here in Dallas this morning, have said, unsolicited, hey, we see what's going on in America in terms of the rising anti-Semitism, much of it because you are defending us here. And we sympathize with that, and we appreciate what you're going through, and we see what you're going through. It's an opportunity now, as I said, under circumstances that nobody wished happened, to bridge that divide that's been growing for so long. We spoke earlier today with Russell Robinson, the CEO of the Jewish National Fund USA, talking about some of the projects that have been ongoing over the last year. JNF hasn't stopped. They haven't been waiting for the war to end. They're still building. They're still going through with projects despite literally being under fire in some of these areas. Here's a bit of our conversation earlier today with Russell Robinson.
A year ago, we came together at this global conference, and we were in a trauma state, the whole Jewish world. A year later, we have the pain, we have the memory, but we also have a year of winning. Just think about it. A year ago, we were talking about people who may not move back to their homes in the Israel envelope. A year later, because of our work and because of the real determination of everybody in Israel, across the world, 80% of the people who moved back to their homes in the Israel envelope, 80%. And things are happening. Now, we're still in the trauma for the poor people in the north who are facing inhumane issues. Can you imagine away from your home 12, 13, 14 months? So we're going to know where we have been, but we know where we're going. And with over 4,000 volunteers from America who have been to Israel through the Jewish National Fund, we intend to bring more there and build that connection. And what happened on October 7th was a trauma and a wake-up call, and we've answered the call.
Kalev, JNF has moved forward with projects to try to draw people back to the north. They've gone forward with building a hospital in Kiryat Shmona, just meters from the border there with Lebanon, as well as trying to replace the decimated food tech industry that's been developed over the last decade or so in the Galilee by building the Galilee Culinary Institute. This is literally as rockets are falling in that area. They say they're not going to back down. They can't think about tomorrow or what's to come. They can only think about today and helping those families that have been displaced here over the last year or so, both in the Gaza envelope and up in the north.
All right, JNF answering the call, which it's frequently had to do throughout Israel's challenging history. Mike Wagenheim there at the conference in Dallas. Thank you for that, Mike. And staying with the U.S., National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan saying that President Biden did raise the issue of the American-Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza during his meeting yesterday with President-elect Trump, adding that the White House is willing to work with the incoming administration to secure a hostage release deal. Now, later in the day, Biden met with families of American-Israeli hostages, and here's what some of them had to say after the meeting.
We came away absolutely understanding that with that same energy and investment, President Biden and his team will continue working to gain the release of all the 101 Israeli hostages every moment up until January 20th. On our part, we impressed upon the president, of course, the urgency of getting the hostages home before another rough winter, as hostages we know are dying of neglect, execution by Hamas, and tragically Israeli friendly fire.
I think we heard that both incoming and outgoing presidents are fully aligned on the importance of releasing the hostages and the urgency.
I would just add to that the fact that they did talk about the topic and President Biden confirmed that, we hope that that is a signal that it stays a priority for the incoming administration as well to get this done.
And after over 400 days in captivity, a new report from the Hostages and Missing Families Forum is raising red flags over the health of the hostages, saying some have lost about half their body weight while being held in Gaza, which may make it difficult for them to survive the coming winter in their challenging conditions. Well, we're joined in the studio by our correspondent, Joe Brown, but I want to first, and we'll get to you in a bit, Joe, but I want to get your view, Neri, because interesting. We heard Daniel Hagari make a point of speaking about the hostages this evening. That's, of course, perhaps in some way in response to that disturbing hostage video that we saw from Sasha Trufanov the other day. And hoping, here you have hoping by some of these hostage families that maybe the developments in Washington will, I don't know, you want to say light a fire or put a kind of deadline on certainly the administration, maybe on the Israeli government, to try to make forward a deal, certainly before the winter really kicks in?
It's heartbreaking, first of all, to see the families and also the hostage videos yesterday. It's been over a year of this, and I can't imagine what the loved ones and relatives of the 101 Israelis and foreign nationals, by the way, still being held in Gaza are going through each and every day. I will say, you put it correctly, Caleb. Light a fire under the Israeli government to make this a priority and to actually move towards some kind of deal to get the hostages back, which will likely require at least a halt to the war in Gaza. Up till now, this current Israeli government has not been willing to take that last step. President Biden has been consistent now for many months. He would like to see Prime Minister Netanyahu take that step. We haven't heard incoming President Trump really express himself on the hostage issue per se. The hostage families that were in the White House today only met with President Biden. They didn't meet with President Trump. You don't really hear Trump talk about the hostage issue per se. We know he wants to end the war in Gaza, but he doesn't really express himself as strongly as President Biden has with regard to the hostage issue. We hope that will change. And yes, the deadline may be once Trump comes into office officially in 2 months, and then he may apply pressure on the Netanyahu government to actually wrap this war up, including, obviously, a hostage deal.
Right, and I do wonder that if there is a ceasefire in Lebanon, that will also then really shift all the focus down to Gaza and the need to move on to whatever the next stage is in the situation there.
And we also know that there are certain elements inside Israel and also outside of Israel, perhaps talking about a package deal.
Right.
I.e. tying both fronts together, Lebanon, a ceasefire deal in Lebanon, and a hostage and ceasefire deal in Gaza, something that Israel, for many months, did not want to do.
Right.
That was the enemy's position, Hezbollah's position, and Iran's position. The thinking, at least in some circles inside Israel, is that, okay, maybe to go for a package deal and make it more palatable for all parties and also for domestic Israeli political consumption.
Right, and Donald Trump, as you said, has said he wants to see the situation, not the hostage per se, he wants that situation in Gaza as well as Lebanon wrapped up by January 20th when he takes office. Let's hope. Let's shift focus now to Paris, where last night pro-Palestinian anti-Israel protesters clashed with French police outside a gala event that was organized by the local Jewish community there to raise funds for the IDF. That incident only heightened concerns going into a soccer game being held in Paris this evening, this between the national teams of Israel and France. Now, French authorities have deployed more than 4,000 police around the stadium and throughout the city, hoping to avoid anything like that rampage last week in Amsterdam when Israeli and Jewish soccer fans were attacked by Arab and Muslim assailants following the game there between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax Amsterdam. Let's take a listen to the concerns expressed by the French and Israeli national team coaches heading into the match.
We've done our best to prepare for this match as normally as possible, but obviously nobody in the French squad can ignore the heavy context. I'm not going to talk to the players about it, but there are obviously consequences in terms of the number of fans that will attend and everything that goes with it. We have to make sure that it remains a football match, despite everything.
I think in these days, to use the word difficult, we cannot do it. Difficult is for the people who fighting in Israel to bring peace to our children and to our future. This is difficult. For us, we have to make this adaptation, and I know to make the separation between the situation in Israel and the football. I don't want to use this situation in order to prepare an alibi, because I'm a sportsman all my life, I was there. But I want to tell you, when we are outside the pitch, we have big difficulties in the national team to hear bad news from Israel. It's affected us a lot.
Well, not the easiest conditions to play a soccer match or any kind of sporting event. Let's go now to our correspondent from our French channel, Hannah Papishvili. She is on a bus on the way to that stadium where tonight's event is. And Hannah, let's talk about how people are feeling about this event. There's the game inside the stadium, and I think there's a lot of concern about what the situation may be outside the stadium.
Absolutely, Kalev. Here we are with French Jewish people who came for this game for tonight. And of course, you know, there is a high security level for this game tonight, but the atmosphere is very joyful here. We can say thousands of police are deployed in the streets of Paris, around the Stade de France also, to ensure security for all the people who are going to see this game, this football game tonight. It will be also President Emmanuel Macron who will be there. It's also a message to say we are against anti-Semitism, and we want to give all our support to the Jewish community and to the Israeli soccer club for tonight, even if we know that there is some protest outside of the stadium, protests like for Palestine, protests who are now on the ground next to the stadium. But here we want to talk about the sport, we want to talk about the love for France, Les Bleus, and about the love for the team of Israel. So why we have so many people here, and we have We have a big fan of football here. It's David. And we have David here. David came to see the game tonight, also to give your support to the Israeli soccer team.
Of course, I'm here tonight first to condemn the atrocious anti-Semitic acts happened in Amsterdam, just a few kilometers away from Anne Frank House. It was like really symbolic to us in this particular city, but I'm here first also to support the French and the Israeli team. We're here to celebrate life and peace, and we're here to celebrate the only country who can welcome us Jewish people. We're here to support Israel and the right of Israel to exist.
Yeah, thank you. Voilà. This is the message for tonight. En tout cas, the police, French police, they said everybody can come to this game. There is a high level of security for tonight. And allez les Bleus, LL Israel.
All right, Hannah, I don't know who's good enough about soccer to know who's going to win tonight's match, but I think I already see who won this evening in France. That crowd there, really, kol hakavod, all the honor to them for going out. Considering some of the risks that may be at stake there. And Joe Brown, of course, our resident soccer fan and expert here. Let's talk about the situation. Let's talk about this whole situation. I think a lot of people don't even understand the complexities of Israel, even in times when there's not a war, to play in Europe and how the situation is. And there are, in fact, a couple of other games coming up in Europe by Israeli teams in which there have been concerns about and special arrangements have been made.
Yeah, so Israel is obviously not in Europe, it's in the Middle East, and it was in the Asian qualification up until the 1970s. Israel's only ever World Cup qualification was done through the Asian Federation, where it's a lot easier than Europe, where you have all the big hitters like France, Germany, and I'd love to say England. But then, because a lot of the Arab and the Asian countries refused to play against Israel, they voted to kick them out. And for a short period of time, Israel was playing in Oceania, so against Australia and New Zealand and American Samoa, before in the early 90s they finally decided to play in Europe in UEFA, the European football governing body. And even now we're hearing that people are trying to kick Israel out of UEFA and out of FIFA in general. In fact, you were talking earlier about the protests in France yesterday against the right-wing pro-Israel gala that they had set up that Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, was supposed to go to.
Right, but he cancelled.
He did cancel that one. Even there, even whilst this was supposed to be a protest against Israel and what they are doing in Gaza, people tried to turn this into a something that's quite close to the football because of what's going on in the game tonight. And this includes BDS boycott, divestment and sanctions. Their spokesperson was at the rally, and they came up with a point as to why Israel should be kicked out of UEFA and shouldn't have to play against the European countries, which, in my opinion, is a very tired viewpoint. Let's see what she had to say.
FIFA and UEFA have both taken a number of measures against Russia, but there's this double standard here when it comes to Israel. It's intolerable. We demand that sanctions be imposed against the Israeli regime of apartheid. Their football players shouldn't parade while the Israeli government wages a genocidal war in the Gaza Strip. We can't turn a blind eye on this reality.
Joe, I think at least FIFA and UEFA have stood by Israel at this time, but let's talk about what that they've had to do in order to make it possible for Israel to play in Europe in what one hopes will be a secure environment.
That's true. I would just like to mention with that point there that the BDS spokesperson was talking about with how Russia was kicked out of UEFA. Russia was kicked out of UEFA not because of the war, but because people refused to play against them, because in the run-up to the European Championships, they were supposed to play against Poland in a playoff, and Poland said, we refused to play against them. So as a result, Russia would have got a bye and would have got into the tournament, perhaps unfairly. Right. So comparing Israel to that is completely unfair, because the only way Israel won't play in UEFA and won't play in Europe is if other countries decide to boycott them. And the odds of that happening are very small. But to go back to your question on what is happening in the upcoming games for Israel. So since the war started, Israel's home games have not been allowed to be played in Israel, in Tel Aviv or Haifa, because of the rocket threats from Gaza and from Lebanon. So a lot of them have been played abroad. A lot of them have been played in Hungary. In fact, Israel are playing again next week against Belgium. That game's going to be played in Hungary. In fact, the home game against Belgium, so what should have been held in Belgium, was also held in Hungary for similar reasons, because of the protests and the security against the Israeli team. But at the end of the month, this would have been a really big challenge, because Maccabi Tel Aviv, who, of course, last week had the incident in Amsterdam where their fans were attacked anti-Semitically, and at the end of the month, Maccabi Tel Aviv's next game in Europe was supposed to be against Besiktas, who play in Turkey. Now, of course, we've seen a lot in the news about how Turkey has been a hub for planned assassinations of Israeli tourists from Iran. So there's no chance that this could have gone ahead in its actual format. But the fact that it was able to be pushed to Hungary as a result, that will also be played in Hungary, that means that there is a possibility that maybe Israeli fans will travel out and Maccabi Tel Aviv fans will feel safe supporting their team under these conditions.
Right, and Hungary, a country that's been somewhat friendly to Europe in the current circumstances. Neri, just briefly, let's put this in the bigger context, because this is not about soccer or football. It's about the challenges that Israel is facing internationally and increasingly so in Europe.
Very difficult times, obviously, in Europe, also in some parts of America. As we both know, a phenomenon, it's not unique to the current moment, but obviously the scale of this past year, the war, and the fact that it's still going on has made it very difficult for Israel or anything even tangentially related to Israel, and especially also including Jewish organizations and individuals and events to actually function in the West. I think it's shameful, and I think hopefully cooler heads prevail, not only in Paris tonight, but also across Europe and other places in the coming weeks and months, and until this war is over. But again, it speaks to a larger problem. It's not just about the current war and the current
Let's start by hoping that the events pass relatively peacefully this evening in Paris. And Neri Zilber, Joe Brown, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us on this edition of The Rundown on I-24 News.